Well, who better to talk about the criticisms of Matt Hancock with than the woman who knows him, his WhatsApps, how he works and how he writes his book inside out. That's Isabel Oakeshott, our international editor. Isabel, delighted to talk to you again today. What do you make of what Helen McNamara now, the senior civil servant, is saying of Matt Hancock? Because while she certainly hasn't been as perhaps box office as Dominic Cummings, a lot of what she's saying has a lot of substance and is backing up actually quite a lot of what her enemy Dominic Cummings has been saying about Matt Hancock. There are not many people saying actually he did a great job during COVID.
Apart from Matt Hancock.
Well, indeed.
From him. I think that the evidence today from Helen McNamara has been quietly devastating. She carries an awful lot less baggage than Dominic Cummings. Everything that he says has to be viewed through a certain prism of his own agenda and obsession with his own magnificence and everybody else's relative stupidity. She has none of that baggage, and therefore I think her evidence will be taken much more seriously. The phrase that she used that really resonated with me was her reference to the then Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, having, quote, nuclear levels of confidence.
Yes.
And I think that's absolutely right. I think pretty much never worked with anyone with such an astonishing level of self-belief. And that's very important in politics.
Says someone who has worked in journalism and the media for the last 20 years.
It's saying quite something, isn't it? And actually, it's a very good and important quality to have if you are providing leadership in a crisis. But it can go too far to the point where you're not really listening to anyone else's point of view. And I mean, in fact, Dominic Cummings was rather similar in that. We heard yesterday how desperate he was really to shrink the size of government. So it is essentially just the Prime Minister and Dominic Cummings and a couple of his chosen people. He seemed to think that the cabinet was just a gigantic irritation and that ministers were really only there to put on a performance, while officials such as his chosen people and himself, to a lesser extent, he was a very political appointee, made all the key decisions. So I think the evidence has been fascinating. There have been a few other things that have come out today from Helen McNamara that really will rile those who are devastated by the consequences of the many lockdowns that took place. In particular, her comment about the impact on children not being properly considered. She said the interests of children were not fully considered, and the effects of shutting schools, that wasn't properly taken into account. Now, of course, you would thought it would have been obvious. She pointed out that the provision of homeschooling in the state sector was so much worse than it was in private schools. And I have my own experience of this because I had a child at the time at a private school, an older child, and two children at the state school. And the provision for the children in the state school was just not even a fraction of what the private sector was able to offer. And vast majority of people, unfortunately, would have suffered at the hands of that very shabby homeschooling provision due to unnecessary shutting of schools.
Absolutely. Isabel, thank you very, very much indeed. That's Isabel Oakeshott there, who's the talkTV international editor.